Everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled. Vainglory is akin to pride, but it's not quite the same. It's the feeling that one might gain after a successful match, exam, whatever brings glory. It's a pride in the human sense of the word about what one has, what one has achieved. It's something that if it's not there, can actually lead to problems. It goes in the case of a drug addict who loses all self-respect and couldn't care less what anyone thinks anymore. But then there is that deeper level which is directly a participation in the original sin of Lucifer, the owning fundamentally of what one has, and an independent spirit and even a rebellious spirit in consequence. I, in English, is in the middle of the word pride. I. And so one becomes the center of the solar system and indeed of the cosmos. St. Thomas More depicts the proud man as one who thinks that the whole of creation has nothing better to do than to sing a perpetual sanctus around his head. I. That's the obvious I, but then there are many intermediary degrees. There are several ways of obtaining glory, of obtaining attention. The easiest is to talk a lot. What is happening there? One is occupying the stage of life. Others have to notice us. We annihilate them by not allowing them to say anything. I am speaking. You must listen. And to make sure that I am speaking, I will talk about what interests me. The conversation will follow what is my interest, at which I am an expert. Listen, because I am. It can happen even in monastic life. But there are more subtle ones too. A classic one in holy people is to reign over the rosary. Observe the person who wants to show that he exists. He will go either more quickly or more slowly than everyone else, in such a way that his voice is heard and one has to think about him. Transpose. The illness can exist also in the liturgy. Observe the person who has to be noticed. He will go at a different speed from anyone else in the responses. He will be, or she will be, noticed. There was a case some centuries ago of a person who on Holy Thursday, when everyone had to go to communion, way back in the Middle Ages this is, who was a knight and lived in an imposing castle of the area and insisted at Holy Communion with drawn sword that the priest give him a large host. The ground immediately began to sink under him. And eventually, as it sank and got to about this level, he placed his hands on the altar and cried out to the priest and to God for mercy. And only at that point did the ground cease to go down deeper. And to this day, the sunken ground can be seen in the church and the prints of the hands on the altar. He wanted to be noticed. The ordinary host was not enough for him. It can happen also, and it is happening, I can tell you, in the case of people who want to be noticed for other things in church. One celebrates sometimes, and one has a job to get such and such a helper out of the sanctuary area. I've had the problem here, not here in this church, but in English-speaking countries, and also in Italy. The person who has to be in the sanctuary and will not go away. Then one has the problem of people coming up even when there's no need at all to have any extraordinary minister. They want to be seen. And if they're not called upon, they might come up anyway and go to the tabernacle directly. It is their right. And they are special lay people. They're category A people. And the new way of doing things, although it's been hampered by COVID, of giving them only the chalice, is actually a demonstration of how special they are, which is actually a contravention of the Lord's own words when he gave them the Eucharist. Take this, all of you. He didn't say category A, yes, and category B, no. He knew how we are all nothing, and we receive. And by the way, that's also a part of the problem. To go to the tabernacle without being in major orders is to appropriate the gift of gifts. It's a misunderstanding, a profound theological misunderstanding of what the nature of the gift is. Even the deacon receives. And in our abbey, in a correct way of doing things, and new right now, the deacon receives the host. We always give it on the tongue. And he should be, classically, the minister of the chalice. In the Second Vatican Council, they looked at the diaconate and extended his rights as an ordinary minister of Holy Communion. Therefore, correctly, he gives also the host. These are now the ordinary ministers of Holy Communion. Some years ago, a young person actually, mother of a family, big into prayer, and also a sacristan, wrote a letter to me in distress because she had taught her children, who were under the age of Holy Communion, to go to the priest for a blessing. And they were trying to do so, but a lay person was coming along and making some kind of blessing over them, and they were confused. Moreover, these same lay people were going happily up to the tabernacle and down again before and after, and she herself was perplexed. So I calmly wrote to her, write this to the congregation for sacraments, the discipline of the sacraments, the worship of the church. And she did. And a correct answer came back with protocol and everything, the number, and it was a clear answer from the English section of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. It answered both questions. Only a priest may bless. Actually, it didn't give that word as such, but it gave to understand that it was abusive, and that as such there was no right prévu in the ritual for a blessing anyway, but that it had come in and was there in practice, even actually under John Paul II, because people were coming up for a blessing as well. But it was clear that the actual right to bless is for those in major orders. Therefore, a deacon can also make that sign of the cross over the forehead of a child. The other was quite clear. It was short and to the point, as all the responses of the congregation would be, and went in this vein. Only a deacon, priest or bishop, that is, those in major orders, may go into the tabernacle. It was clear. And therefore, without my having to answer her question, it was done for me. Now, one answers, but it's happening everywhere. It brings me to another point. It's happening everywhere. A lot of things are happening everywhere. A lot of people are in relationships and are also extraordinary ministers. And because it's happening everywhere, they might also be in grave sin. It's happening everywhere, so it doesn't matter. I want to quote one or two things to indicate that what's happening everywhere can matter. Can matter so much that there's all eternity in the balance. Can matter so much that no matter what other people are doing or saying, one is alone when it comes to answering. Not to other men, but to the one who gave us life and knowledge. Knowledge. This yesterday came to me, and I'm glad to have it. I had it before, but I've got no idea what it's got to in the house. You've heard about it, probably, and it's worth being aware of. It's what happened to one amongst many who died and saw the other side. This dentist, Gloria Toro, in Colombia, was apparently a practicing Catholic. She was with her nephew on a mountain hiking, and a thunderstorm came, and she was fulminated by a very powerful clap of lightning. And it went through her. It actually got into her via the coil that she was wearing or having inside her genitals, and she was dying. They were trying to get her back by electrical shocks. Eventually, she went on. She could see what was going on. Her nephew, by the way, did die. Back to that instant in the operating room. I was really terrified. I saw demons coming for me, and I was their prey. At that moment, I saw many people coming out of the walls of the operating room. At first, they looked normal, but with a look of hatred on their faces, a horrible look. At that point, through some special insight given to me, I realized I owed each one of them something. I realized sin was not for free, and that the main infamy and lie of the devil was to state that it didn't exist. Now, that is basically what one is being told indirectly right now all over the world and in many church circles. Partly because if a priest or a deacon or a bishop says certain things, there will be a noise, and the noise will make him unpopular. Hence, no one hardly ever more will hear such things as any genital use is restricted to those who are in a blessed relationship and in holy wedlock. Now, that contains a whole plethora of consequences. It doesn't mean that such and such, who might have certain tendencies, is exempt from this. It doesn't mean that somebody who has a problem or is not married is exempt from this. I think I know what you mean. And it's therefore clear that this stuff is going to come back in the balance. Listen. I saw how they were coming for me. You can imagine how scared I was. This scientific and intellectual mind was of no avail to me. I bounced off the floor into my body, trying to come into it again, but my body wouldn't let me in. I ran away, and I'm not sure when I went through the wall in the operating room. I was hoping to hide in some hallway in the hospital, but I ended up jumping into thin air. I went into some tunnels heading downward. At first, they had light and looked like beehives. There were lots of people noticed, lots of people. But I started descending, and light became scarce, and I started roaming some tunnels in pitch darkness. That darkness has no comparison. The darkest darkness on earth is like noontime sunlight compared to it. That darkness causes pain, horror, and shame, and it smells very bad. I finished descending down those tunnels and landed desperately on a flat spot. I used to claim I had an iron will, that nothing was too much for me, but that was useless now, because I wanted to climb up and I couldn't. At that point I saw a huge mouth opening on the floor, and I felt immense emptiness in my body, a bottomless abyss. The most horrifying thing about that hole was that not even a bit of God's love was felt in it, not a drop of hope. The hole sucked me in, and I felt terrified. Now, I'm not going to go into what happened in detail. I'm just going to give two details. It's what she was given to understand with one or two points that she thought that she was observing. The Lord's Day. I noticed last night, coming past the church, not here, but that people were already coming out very soon after 8 o'clock, and the Mass started 7:30. I noticed today that there was a big event in the GAA pitch of the village, at prime time on a Sunday morning. On keeping holy the Lord's Day, it was horrible, and I felt intense pain. The voice would tell me how I would dedicate 4 or 5 hours to my body every day, but not even 10 minutes of deep love to my Lord in thanksgiving or a simple prayer. The voice would remind me how the Lord was watching over me 24 hours a day, but I never prayed a little, or on Sunday to thank him, to show him any gratefulness or love. Going to church was the feeding of my soul. Now people are in this posture for a large portion of their spare time, goggling or googling. That is their pulpit. That is their library. And if a priest goes on for more than 5 minutes, he's in serious trouble. What use is that for the soul? Quid hoc ad eternitatem. I was enslaved to my body, and I forgot a tiny detail. I had a soul, and I never took care of it. I never fed it with the Word of God, because I would rationalize that whoever read the Word of God would go crazy. This is linked with it, and it could concern us more than we think. I never fed my soul, but to make matters worse, I would criticize priests constantly. That can now be also bishops and indeed popes. You should have seen what a hard time I had on that one. Ever since we were little, I remember criticism against priests being present in my family. My dad used to say that those guys were womanizers, and much better off than we were, and we would repeat that. And my Lord told me, "Who did you think you were, making yourself God and judging my anointed? The Lord, we know, reserves the judgment of a priest to himself." Remember that next time you open your mouth to bring down a priest, even indirectly. They are human, and the holiness of a priest is built by his community that prays, loves, and supports him. And many a priest goes to some other consolation because he's not well treated by his flock. Observe. When a priest sins, his community is questioned, not him. The Lord showed me that each time I criticized priests, the demons would get attached to me. Besides that, at some point, I accused a priest of homosexuality, and the whole community found out. You can't imagine how much harm I did. With regard to the soul, it's the one thing that you can't talk about seriously. Do you know that this is not a new problem? Have you heard of the great French philosopher Blaise Pascal with his pensées, his thoughts? One was simple. He explained, it's true, we can't actually prove scientifically the other side. There's only one way actually we can handle it in the last resort. And he went into what's been called l'argument du pari, to make a wager, a gamble. Compare the one who behaves as though there were an afterlife and acts accordingly, with the one who opts not to. The first has nothing to lose. The other has everything to lose. And so, as a wise, calm philosopher, he explained, it's better to be safe than sorry. Just think, the soul that wakes up and finds